Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another In Conversation. Now, it's always been my belief that each and every one of us has a talent for something, and the purpose of life is to find that talent and to work out what it is and then express it as best we can. But there are some lucky people who, for some reason, seem to get an extra sprinkling of talent, and that's definitely the case with my guest tonight. Not only is he an international rock star, a brilliant keyboard player, but he also paints, draws, makes woodcuts and ceramic sculptures, and writes poetry. He is Magne Furuholmen. Magne, welcome to In Conversation.
Thank you very much.
It's great to see you. Magne, we invited you here today really to talk about yourself as a visual artist. But as I said in my introduction, you're also a very successful musician. And that has to be the massive understatement of the year, because in the 1980s, you co-wrote one of the best-selling singles of all time with the band Aha. It was called Take On Me, and it sold over 7 million copies. Was a #1 hit around the world and topped the Billboard 100 in the United States in 1985. But just in case there's anyone watching who doesn't remember it, here's a little excerpt as a reminder. Great, and even the video, which took 6 months to make and was revolutionary in the way it mixed film and graphics, won 6 MTV awards. Would you have an involvement in the making of the video, Magne?
Very little. We were a young band at the time, of course. So when we were given the opportunity to work, we were shown the animation and asked if we thought this would be interesting to use for a video. And, you know, to be honest, at the outset, we would have okayed pretty much anything. But it was a really lucky break. There was a great mix of talents with Steve Barron. I mean, you know, as a young band, you walk into a record executive's office and he says, you know, I've got this director who's done Madonna videos, Michael Jackson videos, and would you like to work with him? And we were like, yeah. and then we saw the animation stuff, and I think, you know, there was a feeling that there was something special in the making.
Because this was the glory days of MTV, wasn't it? I mean, it was a really exciting time in terms of pop videos. I mean, looking at it now, the girl's hair and everything, and it looks a little, you know, it looks dated, but at the time, this was really pretty adventurous stuff.
Yeah, I mean, everything has its period, but I mean, that video seems to have taken on, and the song has taken on a life of its own with new generations as well. And, you know, I think
not only that, but on the 17th of February this year, that video clocked up an incredible 1 billion views on YouTube. 1 billion views, that's about a fifth of the world's population. Did you have a celebration that day, Magne?
Oh, sorry, what?
Did you have a bit of a celebration that day, on the 17th of February?
I can't remember if we did. I mean, it's very possible that my mother has watched it 4 million or 400 and whatever billion
Yeah.
times.
It's incredible, really. So here's my big question, Magne. That incredibly successful song, how do you feel about it today? I mean, is it like an old friend that you like to see from time to time, or are you just sick of hearing it and playing it?
It's one of those things you just make your peace with. I mean, it's sort of the biggest statement when you mention Aha to people who are not hardcore fans. That's the calling card, isn't it? So it's like a soldier who's just out there working for us on a daily basis. So I've definitely made my peace with it. I mean, you know, there have been times when you felt that other songs warranted more attention, but I think that's every artist's situation, that you take a little bit of the success for granted, and you always want other things to be noticed as much. But the world decides.
And I suppose in some ways it's the success of that particular song then gave you the possibilities to go on and do all kinds of other things, which is pretty useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's I mean, I was always, as a young kid, interested in three things. You know, it was making music, it was painting and drawing, and writing poetry, and I'm still doing that. And obviously, the success with the music, in many ways, created a situation for me where I had a difficult time breaking through in the art world. I kind of knew that going in. I mean, I was pretty skeptical myself to anyone, from sort of the coming from pop culture into sort of fine culture. I knew there would be skepticism, but I think, I've been lucky in that regard. I've just, kept at it, and had the opportunity to do it on a professional level from day one without, being discovered, as it were. I was kind of already too discovered.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, because I don't know whether you know this. There was a long time ago, when Chinese artists in China, who, when they would become famous and well known in their community or in their village, and they would then move to another town and change their names and start all over again, as a way of avoiding fame and the problems that come with fame. And I was just wondering, do you think it's possible for someone to become a prisoner of their own success? Have you ever felt that?
Well, I tried changing my name a few times. I was a little bit. I almost went for a sort of anonymous, direction when I started exhibiting my visual work. But I think at the end of the day, embracing it and trying to use my particular history in the most effective way has actually been, the embracing of it is what has given me the most. I've been able to sort of skip between the two cultures, as it were, and also mediums, and sometimes even in the middle you can find some really interesting things. A few of my music/art projects have involved people from the music world and the art world, and I think even in involving the audience in a much more direct way than we do as musicians. There's this contract that people buy your records, they listen to them, they buy concert tickets, and then you come and perform. But in the art world, you can do a lot more interesting things that sort of highlights and spotlights fame as a phenomena. And I think for me that has been the kind of, it took me a few years of trying not to sort of separate too much. I remember in the interviews in the early days when I was showing my paintings and stuff, that I tried to separate very much. I was, very adamant about not talking about the music and not talking about that side of my career. But I think for me, it's worked. Once I embraced the situation I'm in and tried to use it for something, then it became much more interesting.
Right, but the band is still playing. I mean, weren't you supposed to be on a world tour right now? Was that the plan? Am I right?
Yeah, I think we cancelled 60 shows this year due to the COVID situation, and it was going to be a big worldwide tour with sellout concerts in LA. We were in Asia at the time touring when the lockdown happened. So, everyone's affected by this in different ways. We are fortunate in that we can push our concerts to whenever the situation allows. So, I feel very privileged in that sense. But yeah, it's become a very different year than we had planned.
Well, I think I could say the same, Magne. Yeah, for sure. I think for most of us, it's been very different. But no, what I'm interested in was just that it wasn't as if you didn't say one day, okay, I've had a huge success as a musician and with a very successful band, I'm going to stop that now and concentrate on a different kind of art form. You've kept the music going. You're still enjoying. I'm slightly surprised you actually still enjoy something like a world tour, which takes you away from your family and your home for long, staying in hotels. I mean, you still find that as something that you want to be doing?
Well, there are worse work situations than going in front of 10, 20,000 adoring fans every night. I think. Yeah. I think there was a shift. I mean, I moved back to Norway in '92, and I kind of left. I did my national service as a conscientious objector, and refused the military service. So I did a year and a half of social service when we had our first child and moved back to Norway, and that's really the time where I'd already started exhibiting, but I focused pretty much. Well, I was doing musical projects. I was writing for film, eventually released some solo albums, but I think the art was my main focus at that point. But then I've tried to stop a couple of times, but every time you sort of hit it over the head, the hammer, it comes back and drags you in.
But are you writing new material for with the band, or are you just playing the ones that people want to hear, the old hits?
I mean, we've released, I can't remember now how many albums, but it's in the high teens. So yeah, a lot of the concerts that we've done over the last years have been variations of our catalog, which is huge at this point. We have, funnily enough, just these days, I'm back in the studio to see what it feels like to write for something for a. So, I wouldn't hold my breath for it, but it's something that may or may not happen.
By the way, I thought the MTV Unplugged was just great. I thought that was beautiful. I think it's just such a great idea, that series of unplugged concerts. Did you enjoy doing that?
We kind of came very late to it. I mean, it's one of those things that, I remember the sort of really great MTV Unplugged things coming up in the 90s, and we weren't really active as a band at that point. And then there were some attempts at doing it, didn't work out. And then finally, just, stars aligned, and we decided it was there was enough distance to our 80s catalog to re-examine the songs and make them ours again somehow. They sort of belong to the public. So we sort of felt that way when we did some really radical changes to the arrangements and decided to do them in the MTV Unplugged format. It was a really, really nice experience for all of us.
I think it works really well. It sounds great. It looks great. Sounds great. Yeah.
It sounds like a sad ballad all of a sudden.
Well, yeah, which is why I think it's really interesting. Yeah, absolutely. It works very well in that format, I think. So Magne, how the visual arts, was that always something that was going on for you? Was it running in parallel when you were with the band, or when you still are with the band? But was that something that you've always done, or did it kick in?
Yeah, I always did it, but I didn't do it with any view to a professional career. But I think out of the whole, sort of situation that success created for us, I needed more and more to go into a creative space that was my own and wasn't a collaboration and wasn't to do with music and pressures of fame and all that. So I established a little painting studio in London in the late 80s. And by coincidence or not, one of the gallerists who had seen my early work from my teens really made contact and asked if I would be willing to exhibit. And he came to London and went through all my work, chose everything that I didn't like and none of the stuff I liked. I forced him to put in some of my favorite paintings, which of course were the shittiest ones. But it took me 3 years to realize that he was completely right in his selection. And I haven't looked back since. I mean, I must have had more than 100 shows in Norway alone over the years. And, in London, Germany, America. So it's been it just feels, for me, it's a bit like farming. I treat it a little bit like crop rotation. I keep the earth, fertile by skipping from one day I'll be in the recording studio, the next day I'll be in my painting studio, and I have a setup now with assistants and people who deal with logistics for me, so I can sort of go straight into almost like a performative action on both fronts, and that's given me a lot of it's nurtured me.
That's interesting. I mean, I've noticed one common thread that runs through pretty much all of your artwork, it seems to me, is an obvious love of words and letters, which you use in a very graphic way. I think we can pull up a still of one of your works that shows this. So where does this come from? This love of graphics, of letters and numbers?
Well, I always tried, I like to refer to myself as a cunning linguist. I think I have. My mother was a language teacher, and so I grew up with a fondness for the English language, and our career has taken us around the world. So I consider myself a sort of a polite guest in the English language, and from films I see and books I read, I'm always looking for grammatical idiosyncrasies or sort of interesting words used in ways I haven't noticed before, and pretty much that will, I think for me, letting go the figurative painting that I started with, letting go the sort of stock use of landscape or figure as a starting point for abstraction, and using words and language and statements, and more in sort of tune with Eastern calligraphy and working with language. That was a real breakthrough for me. That was when things started to open up, and I found my own way in, so to speak.
Beautiful. Yeah, I know. I mean, I love it a lot. And you remind me, you just reminded me of, I'm sure you've seen this in China, if you go to the park early in the morning and at dawn, and there's the old men with buckets of water, and they dip their brushes into the water and just do calligraphy, and the sun dries it out and it disappears. There's something very beautiful about that, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So can I ask you a question that's been sent in, Magne? It kind of relates to what we're talking about. It's from a guy called Bill in Seattle. It says, hi, Magne, you work in several artistic mediums, music, of course, but also in visual art with paint, sculpture, fine arts and graphic design. Does your inspiration direct you to the best medium with that concept, or does the medium precede the idea? Which is quite a nice question. So do you think, today I'm going to do something in clay or in glass, or does to start with the idea and then think this would work best in a particular medium?
I think to a certain degree the medium is very informative in the end result. I typically choose processes that have no turning back to them. So, like if you make a ceramic sculpture, you're dealing with wet clay that eventually hardens and then is fired, and then the result you just accept the way it is. When you deal with it's the same with printmaking. You know, I'm first and foremost a printmaker, and I even paint using the tools of printmaking for monotypes and things that are unique. And so for me, there's something, again, this sort of performative thing that I get really confused if I paint on a canvas, because I can always, you know, paint over mistakes and I second guess myself, and I sort of come back to zero, and I don't really like that. I like having to respond to what the medium is offering. Having said that, the way I work is sort of akin to how I imagine Lars von Trier, the Danish director, felt about setting up a dogma of rules. So for each project, I will limit my palette, or I will limit my concepts. I will sort of choose a lot of things that I'm not going to do. And that actually releases a lot of creative juice for me. That gives me, you know, I'm trying to extract enormous consequences from little inventions, from starting in a very precise space. So it could be something like making, you know, I've been asked to make portraits of people, and, you know, naturally then I would say, okay, but it's not going to look like you. It's going to be almost like an abstract poem. But what I can do is I can rinse the alphabet of all the letters that are not in your name, and see if I can come up with something interesting based on your alphabet. So this is, you know, like applying limitation and applying framework that I stay within. I break my own rules from time to time, but I find it really disciplining. It's a bit like my first museum shows in the early 90s was large scale, colorful woodcuts up to 3 meters in size. And, you know, that sort of almost became like a hit, and it almost became, it's like with music, it's like, I don't want to do that again then. I want to do what I cannot do or what I haven't done. So the natural thing for me was to say no more woodcuts for 10 years, no more colors, just one color, and then just work with tonality and atmosphere and see how I go. So I set up these sort of stumbling blocks for myself. I sometimes say it's that the way my artistic concentration revs up is if I sometimes use the image of you know, going home from a drunken party and then planting landmines all over the garden on my way in. So when I wake up in the morning, I don't remember where they are, and I have to carefully find my way out again. Right. But it's something it sounds very overly dramatic, but I think there's something that happens for me when I'm limiting myself to, you know, I think the worst thing an artist can do is start the day in the Louvre or any sort of modern museum and look at all the work and then think, okay, I'm going to go home now and push the envelope of art history one notch further. I would like a lot more of a humble approach. Like, okay, today is yellow day. Let me just see what I can do. I hate yellow. Let me just work with that. Mm-hmm. You know, so it's a bit of a childishness to that, of course, but you know, I engage my inner child from time to time.
You know, it was Picasso who said that he was just basically spent his whole life trying to paint like a child, and I think that makes a lot of sense to create parameters, you know, around oneself. And
I don't know if he succeeded in the end. I mean, he certainly made some very beautiful, simple drawings, and I think simplicity is what he was aiming for. This sort of meaningful simplicity. And you mentioned the Chinese calligraphy, and it's all in that elegant, natural flow that you create. And once you have knowledge, you cannot undo the knowledge, but you can trip yourself up, and you can find new ways of using that knowledge without letting it become a sort of a vanity point of showing how good you are at something.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the part of what Picasso was talking about when painting like a child, was that, children, when they first pick up a paintbrush, there's no self-consciousness about it. It's just a very natural process. And what tends to mess things up, I think, is when we get self-conscious about what we're doing. But I don't know if you'd agree with that, but I think that's what.
Yeah, I think it introduces fear, and fear locks down your mind and stops you from. Yeah. Prevents the flow, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question for you from Valerie in Los Angeles, who says, Magne, you were born in Oslo and lived in Norway most of your life. How does your Norwegian heritage present in your work? I don't know whether it does. Maybe it doesn't. Is there any?
I think it does. I mean, our music as a band, and also my solo work, is, I think, firmly rooted in a sort of a Scandinavian melancholic tradition. When I work as a visual artist, I tend to meta-criticize my own lyrics. I mean, I didn't start using my own lyrics until quite late in the game, around 2003, when I was releasing my first solo album, and I was writing a lot of personal lyrics.
Right.
But I think there's sort of historical figures both in the music world, from classical music, Norwegian classical music, that was hugely inspirational related to the atmosphere, the overall use of minor chords and making minor chords happy and major chords brooding. This sort of paradoxical ways of thinking. And even though my visual work tends to engage a lot more of the intellect for me as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm trying to make my visual work in the same way I write a song. I would like it to have sort of immediate impact, to be engaging immediately without, knowing all the references in the lyrics, or without knowing any of the sort of hidden codes. And I find I like work that has this too, this sort of immediacy, and then there's more there if you want it, but you don't need a manual to go to my exhibitions and see the work. You can sort of live with that first impression.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much like, the magic of pop music is, to me, is that you can hear a song, sort of off your radar, but know about it without even liking it for many years. And then something happens in your life. The time you hear it, it's forever connected to that moment and that feeling, and it becomes important, and it resonates in you because you're ready for it there and then. And I like to think of my artwork in the same space. In fact, probably the best, the most thrilling comments for me is when people come, years down the road and say, "Oh, I really miss the atmosphere in that room you created in this and this museum, and I miss being in that room." And that has something to do with atmosphere. It has something to do with charging the room. And this is what you do when you write music. You charge the room for the recipient,
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Have you ever, just occurred to me to ask you this, have you ever been asked to do any work for the theatre, for backdrops or a set design? Because I can see your work working, looking, or even opera, in the opera world could be fantastic.
We've had an opera production in the running for the last 10 years almost, and trying to get traction on it. And it's almost happened a few times, and it isn't quite buried yet. But for me, it's I'm curious about all the ways I can use my my eyes and my hands and my artistic viewpoint in areas that I haven't done before. So theater, I mean, I've done some things, some sort of installational things for theater. I've done theatrical performances in my own right. So I've dabbled in a lot of different mediums, and again, it's something that I find nutritional,
Yeah, yeah. Well, as you know, some of your ceramic pieces are part of Viking's art collection, and we have several of your pieces on various ships. We have a still of one showing just now, which I think is on the Viking Sky. My first question is, what is the significance of the shape of the vessel, or the vase? I don't know what you would call it, a vase or a vessel. To me, it makes you think of something the Egyptians or the Romans might have used to store grain in, or something. It has a rather sort of classical shape to it.
Yeah, I don't like the word vase, but I like vessel and I like jar. This is a vanity point only, but all the history of a container for something precious or important is part of the allure, I think, of making objects like that. Yeah. I stayed with that shape since I started making these in, when was it? 96, 97, I think. And it's like a three-dimensional painting. And what I found when I started introducing my lyrics and poetry and words to it was that it would produce new unintended poetic images. So like from one side, because I walk around it, and I immediately get drawn to certain words that wasn't necessarily coupled, creating a new statement, and I can exaggerate that, or illuminate that, or I can sort of skip by and do something else. But the finished product is something that is mysterious in the way that you don't see it all at one point. You have to move around, and it gives you only a little bit of itself. Right. And that also, from a painting point of view, it worked. I mean, the early jars were very sort of painterly and non-verbal, but introducing the written word to them added for me. It was like rediscovering the shape and what it could. And in some instances, I've brought back sentences and put it back down on paper as poetry, even into songs, actually, from combinations that was not intended by me in the first place, but happened because of the size and the sort of logistic of how I work with the object.
Right. I mean, my first reaction when I saw those on the ship was that and I liked them very much, I should say. What I really liked at the beginning was the contrast between the smooth classical shape of the vessel and the kind of untidy, chaotic, abstract paint and words and letters just up and down the sides. I think that contrast works really well. I'm just wondering how those are your words, are they, or are they from?
Yes.
Yeah, they're your words. Okay.
Some of them come from songs. Some of them come from poetry. Some are triggered by, as I said, I know on a couple of the things I have on one of the ships, I think it was Orion. I actually wrote a piece of poetry just doing research on Orion and into the Greek.
Oh, lovely. I didn't know that. Yeah.
This founded the sort of wordplay that I ended up using for the jar. But you mentioned the shape. Actually, what I was trying to go for was something very simple and something that wasn't the classic sort of, Greek or Roman vases, but a very sort of timeless shape. And the way I achieved it was I actually just hammered a nail into a floor and took a piece of string and let the circumference, tried a few different lengths. Yeah. So the circumference would be either, more rounded or flatter. And then you end up with this elliptical shape. And if you cut it right in the middle, it looks like a stub cigar. But if you then move it down and up, you change the shape into something much more elegant and in my view, and at a certain point almost like it floats, like it's an object that's heavy but at the same time has a lightness to it.
You see, I didn't know any of that. That's what's lovely about having conversations like this. Next time I'm on the Orion, I'll look at it differently. That's gorgeous. I know for a fact, though, that every time I see your ceramics on board, there's always something new to discover. There's always a new, as you said, you can walk around them and find there's new little, things pop out that you haven't seen before. And that's part of the pleasure, I think. Maybe we can put up one that's on the Viking Jupiter now, James, another one of the ceramic vessels. Yeah, this is, a lot of people love this one. I think the colors are just great for a start. Also, some of your pieces are, not this particular one, but some of the things you produce, Magne, are just enormous. This totemic sculpture, James, can we show that? I mean, this is just, I mean, what is it like working on a piece? I mean, I'd be so nervous of just thinking, I don't really like it. I mean, that's what was it for? Where was it going? I mean,
I did an extensive ceramic sculpture park in just outside Oslo as a commission, and the two main pieces are this jar shape that is, and they're 6 meters tall, and when they go into the kiln they weigh about 10 tons. I think they weigh about 8 when they come out. They spend about a month being fired. And then you have to lift it up. Everything's done by crane, so you can't move the jar. It has to, first it's built, then it's decorated or artistically treated. Then it has to dry for a month, in controlled circumstances.
Right.
Then it's fired, and at that point, when you actually build a kiln around the object. And then you lower it down in pieces over, take the roof off the building and use cranes to.
Wow.
And then when it's done, you take off one piece at a time, and it's a scary moment because you don't know if it's a 10-ton blob of concrete that's kind of collapsed on itself within that month. So and it's also a bit of acceptance in the fact that when it comes out, that's how it is. You can't change it. And I mean, I must admit, the first one I did was for the Norwegian city of Bergen in '98, around the millennium change, I think.
Right.
May have been a bit later. It's a bit fuzzy, but I remember being very nervous about that one. In fact, I made 2. I made one, wasn't completely happy with it, scrapped it, and made another. And that's a very, very expensive way of working when you're working with, tons and tons of clay.
Yeah.
But for the sculpture park that I mentioned, there was a total of 70 tons of clay involved in the sculptures that are there. And they have various shapes, and some are even in the ground, just like flush with the ground. So there's a great variety, and that's what I love about. I've been going to Denmark. And I have a studio there that I've been making ceramics in since 1991. So it's become like a second home to me, and it's I constantly just have to strive to not repeat myself and introduce something new.
What an exciting commission! Of course, it must have been a wonderful day when that commission came in. I would just, really, that's something.
To be honest, the wonderful moment and also the terrible moment was when it opened, because then nothing could be changed, nothing could be bettered or improved. But for me, it's like when I get a commission like that, I get a surge of excitement, but it's almost like an irritation that doesn't go away until it's done. And I guess that sort of that laser focus that just doesn't let you out of its grip is something that helps if you're an artist or a musician or whatever. It just, it's just something that irks me until it's done. I can't sleep well. I can't think of much else. So obviously my family has a very patient group of people.
Yeah. Well, let's we have a little video clip that we can show. There's this still. Yeah, is that where is that? That is the part of the sculpture park. There's one right Oh, there's one behind it too.
One behind it, and there's quite a few standing sculptures, and also around these buildings there's a whole sort of a newly built complex that was established, and I was asked if I could do something with it, and I felt that the modern harsh sort of, well, not harsh, but very stringent lines and very sort of non-human, squares of the facade dictated to me that I needed some sort of pliable organic matter that would give a sense of timelessness to it, almost like a part excavation site, part storage space for the future.
But having just a thought that occurred to me, you have ceramics like that outside permanently. I mean, winters are pretty tough in Norway with the ice and the snow and the sub-zero temperatures. They don't get too damaged by the weather or too much?
No, they're fired up to high enough temperature so that they become frost-proof. So they're quite happy. But one of the sort of complicating elements in the sculpture park is that I'm using water in the summer and steam in the winter. So there's steam coming out of various places from the base of one and from the top of another.
Oh,
wow. And again, it's a bit like an atmospheric marker. It's like when you see, it's almost like walking downtown in New York on a winter night. You get this sort of steam coming out from up underground, and something hugely atmospheric about it. And it also makes you see the wind. It makes you read the wind. So I wanted water. I wanted this sort of, so in the summer, there's sort of bubbling or running water over the edges. And I really, that can produce, sort of buildup of ice and things like that. But, there are technical ways. I mean, we put men on the moon, so making some jars live for a lifetime shouldn't be too hard.
You're quite right. Let's, we have a little clip that I really enjoyed watching, showing just how physical ceramics are when you get right down to it. Let's have a little look at that. That's incredible, Magne. Who needs to go to the gym when you can work with clay? Wonderful. Looks hard work. That, and that's probably a good place to bring our conversation to a close, Magne, with you getting your hands dirty working with clay. One last question though before you go. Could you just what are the plans for what's coming up musically or artistically that you can tell us about?
Well, plans have changed. As we talked about earlier, this is a unique time, which is, a time of reflection in many ways. If you're in a position to do so. So for me, it's been quite a fertile time. I'm doing music projects. I'm doing some of them, obviously, concerts and stuff have had to be cancelled, but. I have exhibitions coming up. There's a big retrospective coming up in a couple of years that we're preparing now, and I'm also curating other artists, working on a very exciting project called Rev Ocean, which is a huge research ship where 60 scientists will be focusing on oceanography. Wow. And there's artists involved. There's art on board, and I've worked with a lady who's employed by me, and we're curating all the art on board, and we're using young Norwegian artists on board. So I fall elegantly out of that category, of course. And then there's an ongoing dialogue with scientists and artists in residence on board the ship, and possible exhibitions and networking into international art world. So there's a lot of stuff going on both fronts that are hugely exciting at this point in time. And other than that, I potter into my painting studio, my recording studio, and I try to make something beautiful.
That's great, Magne. Thank you so much for giving up your time and sharing part of your world. And what a world it is. Gosh, there's a lot going on, and sharing that with us. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Good luck. Thank you to you.
And thanks to all of you, our guests, for watching. And I hope to see you again next Tuesday for another In Conversation. Until then, from me and the Viking team, thank you and goodbye.